This video is going to be talking about the input parameters for a COMET ONE optimal schedule. So the first input parameter that we have is which data set you're using. So we have a number of teaching data sets, and we're going to be using the Antarctica data set, the 10 sequence version of the Antarctica data set. So you'll notice there's a 1 sequence version of this mine or a 2 sequence version, but we're going to be using the 10 sequence version of this mine. The next parameter allows you to do comparison cases. So our base case is maximizing the net present value, but you're also able to add another case, like a different objective, like maximizing the reserve cash flow or the period cash flow, or doing some sensitivity studies. Because we're focusing on the input parameters though, we'll just leave this at only optimizing the base case, which is maximizing the net present value. Now, most of the input parameters are hidden below this plus sign, so you can expand the input parameters to see that there's a number of groups of input parameters, and we can expand that again to get the detailed information about each of these. So the first group is information that's relevant for the whole project. So we've got things like the discount rate, the units of value, if you had an initial capital injection or a final closure cost or terminal value, you'd put those in here. Now, convention that we use in COMET ONE is to put costs in as a negative value. So you can see here our closure cost of $100 million is put in as negative 100. If you want to change any of these properties, like we've got a 10% discount rate here, and you can see we've got an NPV of $7.7 billion. If you want to change one of these costs or parameters, input parameters, then after you change it, click Optimize Preview or Optimal Preview, and you'll see increasing the discount rate has then dropped our net present value, and the subsequent results underneath here will also be reflected. So it's quite easy to change some of these parameters. Click Optimal Preview and see the results. I'm not going to explain every property because I think the labels are fairly self-explanatory. The period information just contains the year that the schedule starts and the costs for each year. Again, because they're costs, they're put in as negative values. Now the rock properties actually have 3 main groups of information. The first one are attributes of the rock. So these are often geological attributes, such as the copper and gold. They can be mining attributes, such as the haulage rate and the mining cost. They can be metallurgical properties, such as recoveries and concentrate grades. So there'll be a set of attributes that you'll have for your project. These training data sets have got the number of attributes defined. But when you use the customized data sets, you can have a lot more attributes. The next area is the cutoff grades. So these are buckets of material that we're going to break the resource into, which will then apply a cutoff grade and send some of those buckets of material to the processing plant and others to the waste dump. Now, these are also predefined in the data sets, in the sample data sets. You can see you go from a low cutoff grade up to a high cutoff grade. The last major rock property is the mining sequence itself. So this is the 10 sequence data set. And so if you expand this, you'll notice there's 10 of these grade tonnage distributions. So these are all the attributes going across here and the cutoff grades coming here. And if this was a pushback, this could be the first bench of that pushback, and you had to mine all of this increment of rock before you could start on the next increment or bench of material, and so on, down to 10 benches. Now the last area is for when you want to use mine-specific grade tonnage information. So you can actually customize the grade tonnage curves, which includes how many attributes, how many cutoff grades, and how many sequences you're using. Now the last area is for the cash flow. So in the cash flow is where you put most of the constraints, costs, and revenues that contribute to the cash flow. So we have 2 main processes that the material can go through. There's a high grade process, and then there's just all the rock or the mining material. So you can see in here you've got the mill capacity, the mine capacity, how much it costs per ton to process the material through the mill, how much for all the rock or the mining cost. And then we've got some revenues over here as well. Some revenues for copper, some revenue for gold, and some recoveries that we're using as well. Again, revenues are positive, costs are negative. And then the last option is the system maintenance for things like deleting a case. So you don't need to worry about that just yet. Okay, that summarizes the input parameters. We'll be looking at some of the results in the next coming videos. Feel free to leave some feedback down below.